Well, good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to talk with you about this particular subject. I think anyone who's asked to talk about the future these days does so with some trepidation, particularly if you're going to predict anything over the next 12 months, let alone the next 5 years. So I thought it might be better that we reflect more upon the latter part of this, the challenges posed to marketers, than necessarily on the changes, because it's a bit dicey. But to take some of the trepidation away, it's always good to draw on observations and studies from a somewhat more authoritative source. There's always conjecture and debate in the media groups and the media itself about market growth and the share of advertiser dollars, so far be it for me to add any more conjecture of my own, but rather I think I would draw on, is this working? Yep. Or on a somewhat more authoritative source, and I was fortunate to have been at a presentation made by PricewaterhouseCoopers a couple of weeks ago about the media and entertainment industry between 2012 and 2016. They're far more, in a far more better place than I am to make these sort of things, and have spent a lot of time and effort. And they've allowed me some of the figures to show to you today from that. Not working here. From that report, which, if you really want to dig into it in some detail, has some interesting reading. First, they put it into the regional context. It's really interesting to see what's happening up in Asia before I talk to Australia, because we tend to look at ourselves rather narrowly sometime. Something's not happening here. The Asian markets are, in fact, booming, double-digit growth amongst most of them in the entertainment and media area, and it's not just about their healthy economies driving the segment as a whole. It's also about them catching up to where we are. Because just as the trends tend to lag, our trends tend to lag the United States and the UK, some of the Asia-Pacific trends lag ours, but the lag is a fairly long one. Pricewaterhouse see these in the areas like newspaper publishing, for example, which is growing in the region at 3.6% compound. Clearly in Oz, we've had a great run, and there's still growth forecast in some segments, and there's still a great opportunity for Australian entertainment and media businesses to ride that wave before it subsides to the level of our like markets such as the USA and the UK. Here is their view. Now, I know there are a lot of newspaper and magazine people in the room. This is their view of what our revenue streams will be over the next 5 years. I'm going to suggest to you at the end of this speech that this is not reason to be slitting your wrists. There are ways in which you can work with marketers and in the media agencies to address some of these issues, but nonetheless, they've made some predictions here that there'll be slow to flat advertising revenue growth in Australia over the next few years. On average, with the exception of the internet, overall they expect around about 2.8% compound over the next 5 years. It doesn't mean that they expect that the market isn't going to be volatile. Consumer sentiment continues to fluctuate based on fears of job security, fears about the international economy, and consumer confidence changes. So too does the marketer's ability to spend on advertising when these factors come into play, and they highlighted that in this report. There's also sure to be a downturn year. There always is in a 5-year period. Their view is that quite possibly it's next year. Certainly, calendar 2013 is going to be quite interesting, and I have some sympathy with that view. I've observed over my period of time in the Australian marketplace that consumer confidence typically falters when there's an election year, and I'm quite sure that the election year next year is going to be extremely interesting. Confidence falls, spends get held back, and if it comes anywhere close to June, the double whammy of the end of the financial year plus an election year causes a lot of concern to marketers about where they're going to stand going forward, and to businesses. So I suspect the next year might be a little bit tough. Here is their view of the Australian advertising market by platform. They see, as I said, some growth, a couple of $1 billion over the next 5 years. But clearly, clearly this continues the structural changes being wrought in the ad market by the internet, which you can see growing from 22% to 33% share by 2016. This reflects some of the conversations in the earlier speakers were making. But they also cut the data to reflect cross-platform ownership. And there's not much of a change in that either. A little bit more stability. The internet is still growing from 18 to 28%. And the growth belongs to the big global players, particularly in search. So this is what Price Waterhouse predicted as the broad changes over the next 5 years, all of which have implications for the media and for each of you who work in it, and no doubt for the Audit Bureau. So what are the challenges for marketers? Here we go. Which is the chicken and which is the egg? The eternal question. Will it be the marketing activity that follows the predicted expenditure, or the expenditure follow the marketing activity? It's easy to be deluded by what these predictions are and say, I must go there because someone says it's going to go there. I recall some years ago, someone called Faith Popcorn, an American futurist, said, oh, people were going to sit in their homes and the future's going to look a particular way. It just didn't happen. Why? Because people did what they were going to do. They didn't do what she thought that they were going to do. No one ever challenged her. So you've got to look behind what people predict and to make your own decisions about whether that will occur. In my view, the new platforms will continue to create a very fertile nest for the more progressive marketing, let's call them the chickens, to create some more interesting marketing activity, or more eggs if you want to continue the analogy, whether they're boiled or scrambled, or in the case of the more sophisticated ones, maybe an omelette. There are some wider challenges and opportunities for marketers in the next 5 years than just the media platforms. And I would suggest to you in the audience that you must begin to think much more widely than just look at the media platforms that I just put up on the screen. They'll have implications for media activity and a consequent impact on ad spend. Let me show you some of those. Externally, obviously, economic uncertainty over the next 5 years. Clearly, that's going to be one of the issues. Consumer confidence as a consequence of that economic activity. Structural changes in the shopping habits of people, particularly the shopfront versus the online world. And even combinations of these. I noted in a newspaper article earlier this week, a comment by Bernie Brooks, that admires they're going to look at a combination of these things, that they're going to offer online in-store. So the way in which the shopping habits will change are fairly fundamental, and they've recognised it, and they're going to change the way in which they do business. And clearly, supermarket versus home delivery. It's early stages yet, but clearly the concentration of retailers in the Australian marketplace has some implications for the big FMCG marketers. Supermarkets, hardware stores, petroleum and liquor will become increasingly concentrated. And you must understand that the type of behaviours and negotiating and trading behaviours that exist in the FMCG world in the supermarket arena will transfer themselves into hardware. Why? Bunnings, Masters, Woolworths, Coles. Petroleum, Woolworths, Coles. Liquor, Woolworths, Coles. If you think that the way in which the trading has occurred in the FMCG world will not transfer its way over to that, I suspect you're very much mistaken. It's my view that it certainly will. With that will come high levels of price activity, and increasingly, because of the pressures that are there, that will be marketing funded. I mean, less funds for marketing and more to fund the type of pressures that come in. So it's not just a food and beverage issue. There's a much wider platform of activity which the media, which these entities will suck down upon in looking for funds. Let me give you some idea of the scope of that change. 10 years ago, the ratio of trade spend to marketing spend in the FMCG world was around about 2 to 1, and it was a fairly large pot. If the marketing spend was around about 7% of net proceeds of sale, then co-op trading stuff was around about 15, 16. This year, it's around about 5 to 1. And the total isn't going up. That means the 1 is going down. This is a fairly fundamental pressure upon marketers' ability to spend money in the media and to support their brands in the marketplace. And it has some interesting consequences. There are also a few internal issues. Clearly, category growth, or the lack of it, and the competition in major categories, the pressures on investment in local innovation and product development, which can be brought to the market, in advertising, in marketing activity, is under pressure. The funding of trade and price activity I've already alluded to. Profit demands, more of it, more of it, and more of it. And you work in an international company, the bigger markets, like Australia, are being asked to fund the lower profit levels but higher growth markets in other parts of the world. People resource. Everyone's aware of restructuring. The lack of people resource and restructuring in many businesses is really driving around the way in which marketers are going to have to look at their activity and the number of people have got to do the sorts of things that typically have been done in the past. There is uncertainty about the effectiveness of new and old marketing activity. We all know the internet's great and everyone wants to engage in it, but is it proven? The traditional media, we have some certainty about. We have some experience. We can deal with it, with some of that. But what are the right combinations of those things and what's proven? Spend optimization and justification, therefore, becomes fairly important. If you're not sure it's working, how are you going to justify why you should spend more in marketing and less in price, or more of this and more of that? Spend optimization and justification of your spend, increasingly important. And finally, the explosion of data. Marketers are absolutely flooded with this stuff. How do they make sense of it? And there's less people around to make that sense. The explosion of data, of measurement and accountability, critically important. While many of these are the usual suspects, and you heard some of them before, the consequences for marketers are that the available funds for marketing activity and communication activity in particular are significant and, frankly, quite constraining. But looked at another way, it could be liberating. The latter three in particular in relation to marketing and media spend. It all depends how you want to approach it. My view is these latter three will bring the biggest challenges and also the opportunities for marketers and in the media. Excuse me. It is clear that the new media technologies, both currently available and those we are yet to see, will continue to be very seductive to marketers. And the marketers will be seduced by them. There's no doubt they want to go and try, particularly the younger marketers who haven't necessarily experienced or had a lot of experience in the older world. It'll be the way that the marketers blend the largely unproven activity, the internet and all the things that go with it, and the traditional, more proven activity, which is going to tell who wins and who doesn't win, and who does it better and who doesn't. How to optimize the spend on them, how to measure, record and learn from them, the outcomes that the new combinations of activity which will determine the winners in this increasingly tight economic, competitive and uncertain consumer context over the next 5 years. One of the biggest challenges in advertising and marketing isn't necessarily digital and social media, even though it's talked about a lot, but rather it's the tectonic shifts in the retail world for marketers. And it's the measurement and accountability of marketing activity to optimize and justify their expenditure. Supporting that will have significant implications for the media and all the activity providers and the auditors, the measurement auditors, I mean. Marketers are, in particular, struggling with massive availabilities of data about these wider activity options. They can no longer rely on simple awareness-building activity to result in a sale. The drivers and levers at their disposal to influence the consumer have exploded into a myriad of avenues and combinations. The question is, how do you deal with it when there's so much there to assess? Certainly the media agencies are doing their level best to help them cope with it. But the media agencies are only dealing with the media. There are much wider issues at play. They've never been under greater pressure than they are today to generate a return on activity and the funds invested in it. The old paradigm, I'm not sure how this will work, but let's give it a go and see, now results in marketers and their budgets being under fairly severe scrutiny. So what remains as a major shock to the system for most marketers is the speed in which they now need to plan, deploy, react, and react again to the activity they put in the marketplace. Yet they're faced with all these other options and how to assess it. No longer monthly tracking against 12-month forecasts. Marketing windows have shortened to months, weeks, and in some cases, as in retail, days. In the new online world, in some segments, this may even become hours. And of course, the marketers are in there pitching for funds against the sales guys, and the sales guys can and do drop the price to get an outcome. It takes them a nanosecond to do it, let me reassure you. Now, I'm just joking, well, sort of. I'm an old world marketer. The need for real-time analysis of their own and perhaps the data of others in combination is becoming critical for successful brands to perform in the marketplace. For example, the data that exists in Coles and Woolworths consumer databases with their store sales in different categories and segments, combined with, say, an FMCG brand's consumer database, along with its branded activity in magazines, catalogues, newspapers, television, price activity with those retailers, needs to be assessed and reacted to in real time, and this will become essential. They won't be able to sit around waiting. They're going to need tools that are going to help make this stuff happen very, very quickly, and to be able to react, to put things in place online, for example, to make a change. There are new tools becoming available, and for the more sophisticated marketing companies to sort through these masses of data to make strategic choices in marketing activity, and once those choices are made, to assess the probable impact of the tactical implementation of them. I'm not just here talking about econometric modelling. It's been around for a while, and it has its uses and it has its proponents, and I'm not at all decrying it. But these new tools will rely upon and thrive upon data, the ability to process masses of it from a wide and apparently disparate range of sources and activities. Population, weather, visits to malls, visits to shops, visits to websites, television viewers, magazine and newspaper readers, competitor sales, pricing activity, the list is endless, really. Provided that the data is contemporaneous, that is, occurring at the same time, these tools can look at the correlation between these activities, multiple of them, and assess the probable outcome and probable effect of those correlations. These are really, really powerful tools. The tools will enable marketers to examine far more closely whether or not the combinations of activities they put together to cause an impact in the marketplace really has had the effect that they were planning. And that's what marketers are going to be held accountable for. To be able to look back into the contributing factors, evaluate them, and quickly adjust and replan their activity will become critical. These new tools will deal with that data very rapidly, as fast as the data sources can feed them, in real time or as near to real time as they can possibly make it. They're available and they are already being used. Let me evidence such a tool with which I'm familiar and have been involved in development over the last 5 years. Imagine the cosmos. All millions of those little points in the sky represent data, little spots of data. Some of them clustered into galaxies, and some into planets, and some into moons. The world of marketing and sales exists similarly. There's now out there, I don't think this clicker is working. There we go. The world out there exists in this way with clusters of data, with moons around those clusters, and they all have influences on one another. What was needed and seen some years ago was a way to make sense of that cosmos of data to see whether there was a relationship between the data galaxies, the data planets, and the moons and the clusters that surrounded them. Perhaps more importantly, the strength of that relationship, the gravitational pull, if you will, that one had over the other, to be able to better see what combination of them had produced what outcome, and perhaps more importantly, would produce what outcome in the future. The tool that I'm referring to here is called Brand Communities. It has visualization software within it, which is called Centrifuge. And I'll use a media reference for Brand Communities to explain it, but its application is actually far wider than just the media world. It has much wider implications for marketing. The Brand Communities looks like the universe. And via a set of fairly complex algorithms and neural learning, marketers will be able to combine and sort masses of data, the cosmos, if you will, of hard marking data into these isolated galaxies of activity. With customer loyalty, consumer attribute changes, their competitor activity, traditional media planning, consumer and trade promotion, publicity, events, exhibitions, online activity, all in this one large pot. It can be very confusing. So how do you sort that? One way of doing it is to enable them to quickly and easily isolate and examine whether their media activity, for example, has the greatest or perhaps just as importantly, the least impact on their core marketing objective. For example, increased usage or perhaps more importantly, sales or share, a very powerful tool. Centrifuge is a visualization tool within Brand Community which enables marketers to ask increasingly more insightful questions about what is highly correlated and most likely to have caused that outcome by showing the relationship between activities and the strength of those relationships. In the illustration here, sales of Toyota Corolla have been focused on to see what's the most effective and efficient use of marketing funds to drive the sales of a Corolla. This is a static illustration of the tool, but it has the ability to spin off what is not related to the outcome, or more importantly, what is. If you are not in that data set and you are spun off, guess where you are in terms of where the money is going to go. Powerful stuff for any marketer to be able to choose the most appropriate marketing strategy, and within that, their media strategy. So what does all that mean for you as proprietors of media or vendors of media and the measurers of them? Clearly, more relevant and insightful the more relevant and more insightful data you produce about your media, the better. I'm not talking here about not just talking here about circulation and readership data in the case of magazines and newspapers, or visitors in the case of exhibitions, which I know the Audit Bureau also audits. Though these are important, rather deeper and more penetrative understanding and profiling who they are, what they do, where they shop, by retailer, whether online, what they purchase, by category, by segment, and the big retailers know all this stuff. What media they use, what cross-platform interplay they undertake. The depth of data will be very, very important and be able to be assessed. Many of the people in the room already operate cross-platform, so what data do you have on the combinations of them by type of customer or consumer will be absolutely important. And all of these can be integrated into the wider cosmos of marketing activity data. And this data will be critical if media is to stay in the equation and remain a competitive option which is examined, evaluated and utilised in relation to all other marketing and sales activity options. You are not in the game anymore of looking at just the media thing. You're looking at the plethora of options that are out there to spend. And if you don't begin to pull these things together and look at the totality of your funding options or your revenue options, you're going to be increasingly squeezed down into a smaller pool and be forced into the 2.8% compound growth that you would otherwise not have. A number of marketers are already either working with or evaluating this tool, and it's the evaluation of their marketing activity and their expenditure on activities and the effect their sales and marketing outcomes will have on their sales and marketing outcomes, which will drive the direction of the marketing, funding and consequently media revenues over the next 5 years. If you're not in the game and looking at the wider platform, you're going to be narrowed down. So to draw this all together, while the predictions I put up at the outset from Price Waterhouse in media expenditure are extremely useful and a great guide to business, media groups must increasingly understand that they are not just in competition with each other for the share of marketing dollars. They must recognise a wider competitive set. Rather, over the next 5 years to 2016, they'll be increasingly competing with this wider set. So the faster they find ways to support marketers, even with even more relevant and timely data to use such tools, the more likely they are to be able to get in front of and resist the predicted trends. Thank you. I'm sure there's some questions.